Today, we're diving into the fascinating and at times heartbreaking history of one of the world's most beloved flowers. These elegant blooms are now symbols of springtime beauty, once treasured as exotic jewels of empires, then became the center of one of history's most famous financial bubbles, and during a dark, cold winter, became food to survive a famine. This is the story of tulips.
Let's talk about one of the most humbling experiences in gardening, spending money on soil amendments that absolutely did not fix your soil. Like, you buy the bags, you spread them out, you stand there thinking, this is it. This is the turning point. And then 2 weeks later, your plants are like, respectfully, no. So today, we're talking about soil health. What actually works, what kind of works, and what might just be very expensive optimism.
Hello and welcome to the Petal Plot Pod, a seasonal plant stories and garden tips podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Aneesa.
And I'm Eric.
Tulips may be famous for Holland, but they did not originate there. Wild tulips first grew across the mountainous regions of Central Asia, stretching through modern-day Kazakhstan, Iran, and Afghanistan. These hardy flowers evolved in places with freezing winters, rocky soils, and dry summers. From there, tulips spread into the Ottoman Empire, where they became treasured symbols of abundance and paradise. The word tulip itself likely comes from the Persian word dalband, meaning turban, because the bloom resembled the folds of wrapped cloth. European travelers later adapted the Turkish word into tulip. By the 1500s, tulips had become a luxury flower in Ottoman courts. Sultans adored them. Royal gardens were filled with rare tulip varieties, and the flower became associated with wealth, elegance, and refinement. Tulips were so admired in Ottoman culture that an entire era, known as the Tulip era, was named after them. In the late 1500s, tulip bulbs arrived in Europe through trade with the Ottoman Empire. The Netherlands, with its cool winters and sandy soils, turned out to be perfect for them. That's because tulips require a long, cold winter dormancy to trigger spring flowering. Tulip bulbs need several weeks of cold temperatures to complete the biological process that prepares the flower inside the bulb. Without that chilling period, the bulb may produce weak leaves or fail to bloom entirely. This is why tulips behave as a true perennial in colder parts of the U.S., especially in the Northeast, Upper Midwest, and mountain regions. In those climates, winter naturally provides the cold dormancy tulips need, allowing the bulbs to rebloom each spring. But in warmer climates, especially in the South, winter often isn't cold enough. Without enough chilling, tulips may bloom beautifully the first spring after planting and then fail to return. That's why many gardeners in warmer regions often treat tulips as annuals, planting fresh bulbs each year. Or, alternatively, dig them up after the leaves have turned yellow in early summer and store them in a cool, dark place and refrigerate them for 6 to 10 weeks to mimic winter before planting them again in late fall. Kind of like how we handle dahlias here in Minnesota, but we dig them up and refrigerate them because they won't survive our cold winters. I had a funny realization about this a few days ago, Eric. I saw this Instagram argument about tulips, and people were like arguing about whether or not you should dig them up. And the comments were so interesting, and I realized this is like a North versus South comment battle, right? Because some people are
Yes.
like, what are you talking about? The tulips at my parents' house have come up for 30 years. And other people are like, nope, it's the variety. Everyone was fighting. And it was so
Yeah.
interesting. And it reminded me of a conversation I had had a few years ago with a friend of mine when she had asked me if she should dig up her tulip bulbs. And I was like, oh, why would you do that? And she's like, I had read that you should dig them up. And I was like, oh. And at that time, it was not registering my brain
Yeah.
of like any climate outside of Minnesota, right?
Right.
And then I was like, I guess some people do that to like showcase different plants, but certainly don't need to. And then I was like reflecting, I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder if she got
Yeah.
advice from a southerly source. So I went back and I
Right.
asked her, I was like, hey, where did you read that?
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, I do subscribe to a Southern gardening magazine.
There it is. Yes. Well, and adversely, dahlias would be opposite. They may leave them in the ground in the South and we have to dig them up, right? So,
For sure.
I mean, if we could have one thing in the North of like, we leave this in the ground, let it be tulips, you know?
Mhm. Is there any plant that you wish we could leave in the ground that we can't the most?
Well, I just think of the things I do dig up because I want them year over year. So like, I really love crocosmias and I dig up the corms every year to replant them and go because they generally don't overwinter well for us. I mean, I overwinter other things that are just more tropical, I guess,
Mhm,
as well. But or canna lilies are probably another great one, as well as
mhm.
calla lilies. I dig up all of those. Yeah, every single year.
Oh, there's a garden designer, I'm blanking on his name, but I listened to an interview of him, and he's famous for he lives maybe in the Northeast, and he's famous
Mm.
for tropical gardens, and he digs up, like, dozens and dozens of tropical plants every year and
Yeah.
stores them, like, things like banana trees or, like,
I've
things
done
with,
this.
like, huge leaves. You have?
Yeah. It's interesting, because you basically dig it up. It doesn't have a very extensive root system, surprisingly, and you just throw it in, like, a bucket and wrap
Mhm,
it and throw it in a dark space and leave it, cut all the leaves off, and then the interesting thing is, like, in the springtime, when you take it back out, it holds so much water, and so you'll have some deterioration that's happened around it, and you're literally slicing into this thing to remove all this dead, watery plant tissue.
mhm,
And it miraculously then as you put it out into the warm weather, get it repotted or into the ground, then it just starts throwing up another leaf and doing its thing. So
that sounds fun.
yeah, it's worth a good experiment. I since have decided not to do it just because of the amount of work it took.
Yeah,
But it's completely possible. Yeah.
that's fun. By the 1630s, tulips in the Dutch Republic had become luxury items. Tulips were unlike any flower Europeans had seen. Their bold colors and striking shapes made them highly desirable among wealthy merchants and aristocrats. But the most prized tulips were the rare broken tulips, flowers with dramatic streaks and flames of contrasting color on their petals. No one knew it at the time, but these patterns were caused by a virus. The virus weakened the plant by creating breathtaking blooms, and because the patterns were rare and unpredictable, the bulbs became even more valuable. So I feel like this reminds me of the hosta virus, because like when the hosta virus first showed up, people were like, "What
Yeah.
a cool texture!" And I think
Yeah.
some people were even breeding them before they realized that that was a virus.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Oh, that's fascinating, right?
Yeah, it's interesting to think of a virus causing those color patterns. Soon, tulips were no longer just flowers, they were status symbols. Tulip prices in the Dutch Republic began to rise dramatically. Rare bulbs were sold for astonishing amounts, sometimes worth more than a skilled worker could earn in an entire year. People from many walks of life entered the market: merchants, craftsmen, laborers, and speculators. Many buyers never even saw the bulbs they purchased. Instead, they traded contracts promising future delivery, essentially buying and selling tulips that were still underground. At the height of the frenzy, some single bulbs reportedly sold for the price of a luxurious Amsterdam house. People sold property, livestock, and businesses to buy tulip contracts. Everyone believed prices would keep rising. And then, in 1637, confidence collapsed. At one routine bulb auction, buyers stopped bidding. Panic spread. Contracts that had been worth fortunes became worthless overnight. The tulip market crashed. Fortunes vanished. The Dutch economy survived, but many individual investors were ruined. Tulip mania became one of the history's earliest recorded speculative bubbles, a warning about what happens when desire and greed inflate prices beyond reality. And all this for a flower. What do you say, Eric? Would you sell your house for one tulip bulb?
Not today. No. No, I would not.
That's
I mean,
not in this
that would have to
market.
be quite the tulip for me to make money off of it if I was gonna choose to do that.
Fast forward to the winter of 1944 to 1945 in the Netherlands. During World War II, the Netherlands suffered under Nazi occupation. This period became known as the Hunger Winter. Temperatures dropped, food vanished, thousands starved, families were desperate for anything edible, and once again, tulips those symbols of beauty and luxury became precious, but this time not as objects of wealth, but as food. Tulip bulbs stored in warehouses and fields were one of the few things available, and the Dutch government even distributed instructions on how to prepare them. People peeled the bulbs, removed the bitter center, and cooked them into soups, porridges, and even made flour. Some described the taste as starchy and onion like, others said it was bitter and unpleasant, but when the alternative was starvation, tulip bulbs became life saving. Imagine that transformation. The same bulb that once symbolized excess became a symbol of endurance. It's one of the most striking reversals in botanical history. Tulips fed people through one of the darkest winters Europe had ever seen. Still, tulip bulbs were not ideal food. Some caused digestive problems, and not all varieties were safe in large amounts. But for many Dutch families, they were the difference between life and death. Well, Eric, I know what I'm having for dinner tonight.
Is it is it tulips, or are you making a salad or hot dish?
Yeah, I gotta dig up some tulip bulbs. No, I'm not gonna dig up any tulip bulbs. But I do like, I like foraging and I am comfortable eating many things
Mhm.
found in the wild. So I
Yeah,
feel like this should be on my bucket list
yeah.
of plants to eat.
I mean, you know who is definitely gonna have it for dinner would be the squirrels, so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
if
maybe next time I order bulbs and I get like a fresh, bag of bulbs, I'll have to take one of them and do some culinary experiments.
although there's probably a little bit of a, thing to check of, like, if the bulb has been like, I feel like sometimes they use, like, fungicides and things on the bulbs to
Oh,
maintain them, and so
good
there's
call.
probably definitely a disclaimer out there of, like, knowing what may be added to your bulb, and it
Mhm.
may not be as easy as buying an apple at the grocery store and washing it, so
Oh, thank you for that, Eric, because sometimes
yeah.
I do need a reality check like, to make sure I buy organic tulips.
Organic, and I don't know if that's, like, a thing that's even
I don't
sold,
know.
so
Okay, so maybe I'll backpedal on that a little
yeah.
bit. Tulips carried layered meanings because of the lives they have lived. They symbolize elegance and love. They remind us of the dangers of speculation and greed, and they represent resilience in times of hardship. In Minnesota, a tulip may return for years. And in Georgia, that same tulip may bloom once and disappear. They are living evidence that beauty is shaped by environment.
So today we're talking about soils, and what actually works. So before we get into all the products, hacks, and strong opinions, let's start with what consistently works really across every soil type. And because the list is actually pretty short: organic matter, compost, and repeat it over time. So when you add compost, you're not just adding nutrients, you're doing three things at once. You're improving the structure, you're feeding microbial life, and you're helping the soil manage water better. And that works whether you're in heavy clay, sandy soil, or somewhere in between. So most soils and products are like giving you like little snacks basically for your plants at that moment. And compost is a little more like rebuilding the entire kitchen, to continue to sustain your garden. So you don't need to overcomplicate it. It's really just top dressing once or twice a year. You can use it as mulch. Leave your leaves when you can. It's really not flashy, but it really works. Anissa, what's been your experience with your soil and improving or adding anything to it?
Oh, sure. I compost all of my food and yard waste. So I have
Yeah.
two big compost areas that I kind of rotate every other year. I fill one up and let that go for a year, and then the one from the previous year, put it into the garden beds. I don't often put it into my flower beds though, and I am thinking I need to do more of that because there are some areas that I feel the soil, has a lot of competitive root activity from trees and
Hmm.
shrubs. And I'm seeing a few areas where I'm like, you know what, I should go give them some love. I don't leave all of my leaves, but I leave a nice layer over the garden beds, and those often
Yeah.
get worked back into the soil. So they do get annual decomposition of some kind. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think I've always mostly focused on my vegetable garden, but I really should be focusing also on my flower beds.
Oh, yeah, it is important to continue to, like, add to it, right? It's not like a one and done, because you can have really great soil, and then in time, some of those nutrients and things or structures can actually be used up. So you
For
kinda have to
sure.
go back to it again.
Yeah, definitely.
So now let's talk about what you're actually working with. So, because not everyone is dealing maybe with the same kind of soils, there's quite the spectrum that we can all fall in. But soil is basically a mix of like three particles: sand, silt, and clay. And depending on the ratio, you get different soil types. Walking through those types, on one end, you have sand, which is like big particles, it drains fast. And the other end, you have clay, which is like tiny particles and holds water forever. And then in the middle, you've got silt, kind of smooth, holds moisture, but can also like compact easily. And then loam. Loam is really the dream soil everyone talks about. And it's really a balance of all three. But even if you have great soil, like we said, it doesn't stay great on its own. So organic matter breaks down, soil compacts, nutrients get used up. And so good soil isn't something you just have, it's really something you maintain. And so I've definitely seen gardens and that like started with like amazing soil, and a few years later things just weren't performing the same. Like you were just talking about Aneesa, I feel like you start to see some of that maybe in your garden. Sometimes I feel like people don't think a lot about what's underground, right? And what's happening in the soil. We triage a lot of what's above ground, if it was insect issues or the climate that was happening, you know what I mean? That may be affected. And many times it's really what could be in the soil that is affecting your plants, right?
Mhm.
Have you gone about like other ways of amending your soil? You talked about compost, but have you
Mhm.
done other things to
I
your
do
soil?
I do add plant food or fertilizer to the big flower pots in front of my house. Those I
Yeah,
do add plant food to, but again, I
yeah.
don't usually do that to the flower beds in the ground. I don't know why they just became like, "Oh, they're fine." No, they're not. They also need more
They're
food.
calling out to you in this podcast, Anissa. This is a sign. And do you know kind of soil you have generally?
Yeah, I have so it's pretty nice. It has a little heavy on like the clay side, so I do have to stir especially in the vegetable garden, the stirring that
Mhm,
compost in really helps loosen the
mhm.
soil up. So it
Yeah.
can be it's a little on the dense side. Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely have a little bit of a loamy clay soil. Clay definitely, because that's just the area I'm in,
Mhm.
definitely exists. We're a little bit on a low ground, right? And many times, if just geographically you're kind of at a low spot, it that can more likely be where clay is versus high spots tend to be where maybe sand is. And so my soil's been amended a lot just with like compost over the years. So I know I have like a good like 6 to 8 inches of just nice black soil, but I know there's more clay and things mixed in that and down underneath. And there's like parts of my garden I feel like that are more clay based than I think others are. You know, we have our sump pump that kicks out water, and like that area where that water comes out is like very like clay puddly. I feel like the nutrients have been kind of washed away in that space, and things
Mhm.
don't drain super well. And so
I planted an elderberry where the sump pump drains out because they like water so much.
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I have a willow and a birch tree right where that
Yeah,
is.
we're on it.
All things that, we probably thought at one point, "What can I grow here? What wants to soak up all this water?" Yeah,
We should do
absolutely.
an episode on sump pump plants.
Yeah, this is true, right? And even just having some pumps says a little bit about your soil structure anyways,
Oh,
that
for
things aren't
sure.
just naturally draining down. It kind of sits maybe around your home, and so you have to have some of those other things, as well. So it's also like a telltale sign versus going out into the garden. If there's some pumps, more than likely it's got a lot of clay in the area too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the water table is pretty high here.
Yes. Yeah. So the question is like, how do you actually identify your soil, right? Because before you really fix anything, you kind of need to know what you actually have. And so there's three things I would say that you could do. There's kind of like the super practical, the feel test, which is like the easiest way to start. So like no tools needed. You just grab some moist soil, rub it between your fingers. If it feels gritty, that's more likely sand. If it feels smooth and silky, that's more silty. And then if it feels sticky and really holds shape, that would be your clay. And you can, again, have very degrees of one or the other, but usually I like to do that. And then you can also even try to roll it into a ribbon between your thumb and pointer finger and kind of like push out a long strand or ribbon of the soil, and if it holds together inches out, you've got more of a clay mix. If it immediately drops and doesn't hold, then you're much more on the sandy side. There's also the jar test. I don't know, Anissa, have you ever done the jar test?
Oh, no. What is the jar test?
So the jar test is also pretty simple. You get a little more scientific, maybe, but it's kind of fun. So you fill a jar with your soil and then add water, and then you shake it up really well, and then you let it settle for like 24 hours, and then don't move it. So you'll actually see layers. Your sand will drop first and be the bottom layer. The middle layer will be your silt, and then clay will be on top. So it's kind of like a soil parfait,
Oh.
to kind of get an idea of percent wise, is it half half or 30-30? What is it? And it gives you kind of a somewhat more scientific way of seeing like the makeup of your soil. And then obviously the other part is doing a soil test, right? So you can go through the extension, your local extension service, and send in a soil sample. It's actually really easy. I think sometimes people think like that seems like a lot of work, but it really isn't. You can go to their website and they'll literally walk you through what to do. But you send it in and they'll tell you also amongst those structure components, like what is the nutrient levels, pH, and they think they usually also give recommendations specific to your soil then. And so it's honestly one of the best things you can probably do instead of guessing, which we all like to do, to really know maybe what's happening in an area. I think it's a great thing to do if you've recently moved to a new space. Like it really gives you the lay of the land. And you can also choose multiple areas because the reality is different parts of your garden or place where you live probably has different soil that it's actually working with. Have you ever done an soil test, Anissa? Like an
Ugh,
official
you
one?
know,
No shame.
I
No shame
I
if we
know I
haven't.
feel shame already because I'm gonna say actually not no, even though I know exactly how to go about doing it and I've thought about it. One year, I bought a box of little test strips to just do a pH test
Right.
myself,
Yeah.
never opened the box, but this year I was like, I should really it would be really fun just to know, like,
Yeah.
what my boulevard is like versus my vegetable garden versus just my backyard, and
Right.
so I do wanna make a point of doing that this year, but I'm kinda debating if I should do a soil test now with my garden, my vegetable garden, or if I should wait until I stir the compost in and then do a soil test.
Mm.
Wonder if
I
it
do
would
it
change it.
before. I feel
Yeah.
like because that gives you an idea of what's a little more existing. Some of the prior compost is probably broken down now over the year.
Mhm.
And you do, when you take the test, I know you take the sample about like 6 inches, I think, down. So you're not taking
Mhm.
the top soil. You're opening that up and then digging down to that like 6 to 12 inch soil line, because usually many of us have really good topsoil, like the very top for however many inches, and depending if you're composting or mulching, it's also like where are your roots at, right? The roots of plants are usually at least 6 to 12 inches down, trees and shrubs even more, and so sometimes that's where you need to go to understand like what is that soil like. So let's talk just really briefly on some of those soil types, because some people might be wondering what do I plant in one or the other. And so like a good understanding of like what clay soil is, it's actually really nutrient rich. It just doesn't let plants kind of access those nutrients as easily because sometimes it'll have poor airflow, compaction issues, or the water just sits too long. And so This is why plants like baptisia, switchgrass, coneflowers, red twig dogwood do really well in those conditions because they have long taproots. And then talking about sandy soil, it's really the opposite. As you can guess, it's fast draining, it's low nutrient retention, and dries quickly. So plants like your lavender, sedum, yarrow, little blue stem, they do really well in those conditions. And so, like, I think the mini takeaway is like most plant failures aren't plant problems. They're really like soil mismatches where you just didn't plant the right thing in the right soil type. A little maybe nerdy section here to talk about like the difference between soil chemistry versus soil structure. And so we're going to zoom in just a little bit. So the big idea, like soil health is really those two things. Structure, which is like the physical, the particle pieces of it, and chemistry, which is like the nutrients and like pH of soil. And so structure is, how the water moves, how roots grow, and how air moves through soil. If structure is bad, then nothing else really works well. And chemistry is the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that we hear, like especially on like fertilizers, other micronutrients, and pH. And you can really have like perfect chemistry, but if roots can't access it, then the plant can struggle, right? And so I feel like structure is the house and chemistry is like what's inside the house. So structure is important, hence adding that compost or natural organic matter. Um, I'm curious if you heard like people using sand for clay soils.
Yeah, I've heard people do that. I've also heard people recommend not doing that.
Yeah. And that's probably the right answer because the reality is to loosen like heavy clay soil and improve the drainage, the clay particles are really tiny and tightly packed, and sand is large. And so when you add a small amount of sand in to like fill the gaps between clay particles, it really becomes concrete. And so it actually requires a large amount of sand to add into clay areas. It's actually like 50% plus actually have a difference in like the texture of it. And obviously small amounts really creates worse soil for you. So if you're not getting it by the truckloads, it's kind of like skip it. um Gypsum, I think we've maybe heard that one being used to help break up clay. I've never used it in my garden. Have you?
No, I haven't, but it sounds
Yeah.
fancy.
Yeah, it does sound fancy, right? And so gypsum can help like separate soil particles, but mainly in soils with like high sodium, which isn't typical for us, at least here in Minnesota. It adds calcium and there's kind of a short, moderate benefit, but little impact for most of us. It's just really not that necessary, to be honest. And then lime some people use for raising pH or sulfur for lowering pH. And so what lime does is it will change that pH and that'll affect different plants that can access nutrients. They want more alkaline or acidic soils. And so generally lime works well, but it's slow and needs testing so you don't overdo it. And so you're not really changing soil, you're just kind of changing the nutrient availability. And for sulfur, it relies on microbes to work. So it's slow. And especially in colder climates, it's slower for us. So it's effective over time, but it's very slow to get going. And again, it's just adjusting that pH, which is the long game. The last one that I think can always be controversial is peat.
Mhm.
Aneesa, what have you
Yes.
heard about peat? Yeah.
Well, that it's a limited resource because
Yeah.
you have to pull it out of a bog, and there are only so many bogs in the world. Definitely, I feel like I've heard people say there's nothing that beats peat moss at
Yeah.
amending soil in that way. Like it is literally the best thing you could do if you want to make your clay soil looser. It's great about retaining water, but not having too much water. Like you get a nice water balance with peat moss.
Hmm.
But yeah, people are worried that we're gonna use it all up, and then that's
Right.
gonna change our ecosystem.
Yeah, the bogs that these peat is grown in literally takes thousands of years for it to actually create, and so it's not sustainable, like you said. And it does like improve texture and hold water, but it doesn't add much biology actually.
That's true.
Um, And so the quick take is that it's like great for like moisture retention. So I don't recommend it if you have clay soil because you don't need to retain water. If you
Hmm.
have sandy soil, I can see it more used. And it's kind of also a short term improvement where it doesn't build long term soil health, so it's not really like a soil building solution. It can feel a little temporary potentially in what it does. And so it's something just to note of like the fact it's really helping with versus other options like compost that would actually do a better job of in the long run maintaining what you're actually looking for as well. And I think the reality too is that we all have to kind of accept like the soil type we probably have is probably something we're going to have for the rest of our lives. You're probably not going to significantly change it into something you want even more. It's probably still going to be sandy. It's still going to have clay. If you got great soil naturally out of the gate, great, but maintain it. And so it's kind of important to note that it's not like a 20-minute fix and now you have great soil, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I've heard too that if you're trying to change the pH for something like blueberries, for example, that process can often take up to 3 years to get it to the
Yeah.
balance that you should have.
Absolutely, right. And I think that's why it's kind of important to know your soil first before choosing plants or what you plan to do in a space, because it really can have a big impact on like your success or creating more work or throwaway money that you may be putting towards something, right?
Yeah, we see a lot of people like to buy the hydrangeas that turn blue,
Yeah.
and even if it says on the sign this requires a particular pH, that's like it's a bit of a chore, you know,
Yeah.
and it won't just look like that automatically.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if we lived on the East or West Coast, we may have better luck where we have
Mhm.
naturally more acidic soil everywhere. But for most of us here, at least in the Midwest, that's probably not the case. And we're probably adding amendments to try to get that.
Mhm.
So, healthy soil isn't something you buy, it's something you build. And once it's working, it makes everything else easier. Anissa, do we have a question for the week?
Yes, we do. Let me see here. Okay. So, Richie writes in and asks, I cut open a tomato and I found that the seeds inside had started to germinate. If I just leave the tomato out, will a tomato plant grow out of the tomato? So, yeah, they're definitely germinating because tomatoes have a lot of water, right?
Right. I'm assuming this is a fruit that has fallen off the plant and is now on the ground or
Or maybe they just bought it from the store and it sat on the counter for a while.
ah, okay.
I feel like when they just start to germinate, they almost look like quinoa. The way quinoa sort of opens, just barely. There's a little tiny little green. I don't want to say worm, but that's sort of what it looks like.
Yeah.
But speaking of soil, I mean tomatoes, yeah, they have a lot of water to germinate seeds, but they don't have a lot of nutrients for a plant.
Yeah, they really don't. Um and I was just thinking like question-wise there's a lot of things going through my mind. At first I was like, well, if it's actually growing, yes,
Mhm.
technically,
It's
right?
happening.
It's happening. Yeah. Um And then I was just more thinking the difference between like hybrid tomatoes and, the different varieties. I feel like most store-bought tomatoes are hybrids usually. Um,
Yeah, if you wanna get seeds from a plant or like that or get something to grow, like if you wanna plant sweet potatoes or anything, you definitely wanna get organic. Go to the co-op and get organic vegetables so that they're not
yeah,
sterile. But I would say, yeah, like, leave the tomato as is and then put it in dirt, so that then
yeah,
it can starts to push roots down. It'll
right.
find dirt, so that tomato will just sort of rot.
Yeah,
Because that's what would happen in nature, right?
yeah,
Ideally,
absolutely.
the tomato
Yeah,
falls on the ground, rots, seeds germinate, grows into the dirt. Yeah.
yeah. I feel like that's probably the best thing to do. I don't know if I'd leave it in the rotting tomato, maybe.
That'd be a good experiment to, like, cut it in half and be
Yeah,
like, "Okay, this pot is gonna have the tomato body, and this
yeah.
pot is just gonna have the seeds," and see which one grows better.
Yeah, for sure. Well, sometimes you see like those TikTok videos that like someone just takes like a melon or something, they slice it in half and they just set it on top of dirt and then
Mhm.
magically things happen and there's like a tree that forms out of it somehow.
Wow.
I feel like some of them are extreme, and other things I'm like, technically, yeah, you could just do that. It would grow and happen. And other times I feel like it needs a little help,
Mhm,
like put it in actual soil and remove the other pieces. Because the
mhm.
reality too is if multiple things start to sprout, you might have to thin out, the things. So if you can thin out earlier, I feel like can be
Yeah, if
better.
you just put half a tomato and then, like, "Congratulations, you have 55 tomato plants."
Yeah, right? Yeah, so I don't know, what a fun experience, right?
Yeah, totally, and I guess too, you'd have to make sure you put it by a sunny window because tomatoes need a lot of sun to grow up.
I would almost go for a grow light. I think your window is gonna be not give enough, more than
Mhm.
likely.
You heard
Or
it here first, kids. Go for the grow light.
go for the grow it's so worth it, and you'll have
Worth
much
it.
better success, for sure.
If you have a gardening question you'd like us to answer, please write to us at petalandplot@gmail.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone you know and click the follow button to hear our next episode.
As garden designers here at Petal and Plot, we also offer year-round in-person and virtual gardening consultations and custom garden designs as well. Want to see more of what we're up to? Please follow us on Instagram at Petal and Plot. That's PETALNPLOT.